Wow, I guess I made it all the way to episode 15, and as a result, I want to do a favorite. And I'm also not going to lie, I basically only did Night Warriors because I wanted to get to this game, Vampire Savior, the third installment to the Darkstalkers series. Now, I could litter this episode with jokes about Morrigan's tits again, but hey, I'm trying to consider myself an artist here. And at the same time, Felicia has some too, and they're much bouncier. Okay. In all honesty, this game took a darker turn than the other games. I know, right? A dark turn in a game about creatures of the night. And for the record, if this game is so cool that I can limit the tit jokes while they're still bouncing out right in front of me, it's gotta be good, right? Well, let's check it out. I noticed that the majority of what I've been doing has been one-on-one fighters, and I did play a ton more arcade titles than those, but this may prove a point as to how oversaturated the arcade market was with these types of games throughout the 90s. Sure, there were a lot of good ones, but there were just some thrown in there because it was popular, and that's where the 90s stayed for a while. But what about those standout titles that rose above the others in some way, or were just better and didn't get noticed as much? This is how I feel about Vampire Savior. Much like my YouTube contributions, not too many people have seen them, but those who have are huge fans, and I thank each and every one of you for the time I've stolen from you so that you can see my online antics. But I'm getting off topic here. This is how I feel Vampire Savior was. It was great, and those who partook loved it to death. I just didn't feel it was as popular since Street Fighter was so far along at the point of this coming out. Your average arcade customer was probably like,
"Another Capcom fighting game? When will it end?"
And over 10 years later, it still hasn't. The game itself was so damn cool, but I'm gonna let you know this. I had Darkstalkers 3 on my PlayStation, and there were some differences between that and Vampire Savior. So if I make those mistakes, I'm letting you know I'm aware of it, and if I can let it slide, you should too. And I still love you. I mentioned earlier that this game took a darker turn than the others. The previous games had a cutesy dark feel to them, but this one, while it still had it to a point, focused on the darker element of what the series should have been. The backdrops alone are what would sell me more than most. I have a lot to say about that, so I want to get the other stuff out of the way first. The gameplay was pretty much the Darkstalkers formula with the EX and the ES moves, but now there was a Dark Force move. These are what stood out about this series the most, if you ask me. Now you could go into a duration attack mode and have some pretty cool things happen for a little while. Examples: Lord Raptor would use a pretty kick-ass chainsaw. Morrigan would have two of herself mirroring each other on either side of the opponent, or Felicia would call upon a little cat-girl sidekick who would throw in some random hits as you played. This was one of the best additions to any fighting game I've ever played. Another difference was the fact that you could heal a little after you were hit, if you stayed away from the attacks for a little bit. The round system was ditched for more of a Killer Instinct style on how they did the life bars. You get 2 life bars as well as your opponent, but when one runs out of the first one, the match doesn't start over. Wherever your life bar was at when your opponent's ran out is where it stays, while your opponents get theirs refilled, as well as vice versa. The story is this: Jeddah, a new character who is a high noble in the world of the dark creatures, is brought back to life after his death long ago. He isn't pleased with what has become of this demon world and is hell-bent on recreating it. Get it? He makes himself up a new dimension and summons acceptable souls to bring into his new world. Coincidentally enough, these souls came from the first 2 games, along with a few others. The new characters were as follows, and I'll be trying to summarize this once again. Jeddah, the one I mentioned earlier, who is also the boss of the game, is a high-ranking noble and shape-shifting soul stealer with a liquid body. QB, something called a soul bee, whose race consists of bees who eat souls to live. B.B.Hood, a deceptively cutesy, lethal poacher of creatures of the night, probably the only human character to enter the franchise. And lastly, Lilith. A second Morrigan? No, but kind of a little sister to her. Morrigan's powers were too strong when she was young, so some were separated and put away. After some time passed, when Jeddah creates this new dimension, these powers are granted a body, and Lilith is born. With no knowledge of the real world, she seeks her true body, Morrigan's, and believe me, I'd see her body too. I was talking about level design earlier. This is not the most awesome part, but I was very impressed by most all the levels. Is that a guillotine with 3 head holes? You wouldn't see any of this stuff in another one-on-one fighter. Just to pick a few, I would say the Iron Horse, Iron Terror level, where you fight on the engine of a very strange train that has mouths and eyes that move around, was so surreal it was like something Salvador Dali created himself. The Tower of Arrogance, I thought I was fighting on a space station for the longest time until I looked closer. Can you see it? You're fighting on the side of a skyscraper. And lastly, the Fetus of God. Let me just repeat that. The Fetus of Farging God. I'll show it to you for a few seconds because, No words. No words can convey that level of awesomeness, except one.
Scrum Trelesson.
This was released on the following systems, and even though PlayStation called it Darkstalkers 3, it was just because of the addition of the omitted characters from the arcade version, plus a few new options while you fought. Give this game a quarter if you see it. I'll give it my soul. Oh, I already promised that to Mortal Kombat 2, but trust me, it wants yours. Or at least most of the characters do. Arcade Pass, let's make it last.